It started with a phone call, but not just any phone call. On one end was Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and on the other, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Two leaders, thousands of miles apart, yet suddenly drawn into the same storm. That storm? A trade war unleashed by US President Donald Trump, one that's putting their countries directly in his crosshairs. What followed wasn't just a polite diplomatic exchange. It could be the early sparks of a global economic realignment. The Trump tariff blitz. The turning point came when Washington dropped a hammer on India's economy. On August 7th, President Trump announced an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, pushing total duties to 50%, one of the highest rates any U.S. trading partner has faced in recent history. His stated reason? New Delhi's continued imports of Russian oil, something Trump claimed undermined U.S. interests. The move wasn't gradual either. The new tariffs are scheduled to start on August 28th, based on the official announcement, though such measures sometimes have grace periods or exemptions. Brazil fared no better. Goods from the South American giant were also slapped with 50% tariffs, though with some lower rates on select sectors like aircraft, energy, and orange juice. But here, the reason wasn't oil. Instead, Trump tied the penalties to what he called a witch hunt against his political ally and Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, who is currently on trial for allegedly plotting to overturn his 2022 election loss. India and Brazil under pressure. The tariffs on India and Brazil came amid already tense U.S. relations with both countries. Washington's ties with New Delhi were described as being at their worst in years, and the diplomatic mood with Brasilia wasn't much brighter. Yet for Modi and Lula, the timing of these moves created an unusual alignment of interests. Both were now among the countries most heavily targeted by Trump's trade agenda. Both were members of the BRICS group of emerging economies, and both faced the challenge of protecting their export markets from a sudden American chokehold. Lula, never one to waste an opportunity to rally allies, quickly confirmed during the call with Modi that he would make a state visit to India in early 2026. The visit would aim not only to strengthen bilateral ties, but also to coordinate strategies on how to respond to the United States trade policies. Their offices confirmed that they discussed the international economic scenario and the need to address unilateral tariffs, with both leaders agreeing that the burden on their economies was significant.
This is a story about how the world's most powerful, richest country is slowly losing its influence.
And it's evident here.
We can see across Brazil, thousands of Ford cars almost disappear.
A BRICS response takes shape. Lula didn't stop at bilateral talks. A day before his call with Modi, he told Reuters that he would push for a broader conversation within BRICS, the group that includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, about how to respond collectively to Trump's measures. I'm going to try to discuss with them about how each one is doing in this situation, so we can make a decision, Lula said. He pointed out that BRICS now counts 10 members at the G20, giving it considerable weight on the global stage. This potential unity is notable because BRICS, despite its geopolitical symbolism, has often been more of a loose association than a tightly integrated bloc. Its members are geographically, economically, and politically diverse. Historical tensions between China and India, for example, have sometimes limited cooperation, but with Washington now targeting two of its largest members with the same economic penalties, the calculus might be shifting. Trade numbers and economic stakes. The stakes are far from abstract. Last year, trade between India and Brazil was worth roughly $12 billion. Both leaders want to boost that figure to over $20 billion annually by 2030. Achieving that will require more than warm words. It demands concrete steps to deepen market access, improve supply chains, and perhaps most importantly, insulate trade from U.S. tariffs. To that end, they discussed expanding the preferential trade agreement between India and Mercosur, the South American trade bloc that includes Brazil. They also explored linking their virtual payment platforms, which could make cross-border transactions smoother and less reliant on US-controlled financial systems. Globally, the numbers paint a telling picture. Only 14% of trade among the 5 core BRICS nations happens within the group itself. meaning most of their economic activity is still tied to partners outside the bloc. China's trade data underscores this point. Just 9% of its exports go to BRICS countries, compared to 15% to the US and 19% to emerging Asia. Yet there are signs of growing internal links. China-Russia trade hit a record $244.8 billion last year, while China and India remain the two largest buyers of Russian oil. Brazil's export profile is similarly revealing. 28% of its exports go to China, and China supplies 24% of its imports. In fact, about 70% of China's soybean imports come from Brazil, according to UN Comtrade data. Modi's moves beyond the Americas. For India, Trump's tariffs have triggered more than just talks with Brazil. Modi is preparing for his first visit to China in more than 7 years, a trip that could signal a thaw in relations between New Delhi and Beijing.
Told you that America's biggest trade weapon just became China's greatest advantage. While Trump celebrated imposing crushing 50% tariffs on Brazil and promised to bring manufacturing back to America, satellite images were revealing something shocking happening in Chinese ports and factories. The largest economic miscalculation in modern history was already underway, and nobody in Washington saw it coming.
While India and China have clashed on border disputes and regional influence, the economic pressures from Washington could encourage both sides to find common ground. Strengthening ties with Beijing could give India more leverage in negotiations with the US and diversify its trade routes away from American dependence. Such a diplomatic pivot wouldn't be unprecedented. Trump's trade strategy has often aimed to push countries toward bilateral deals heavily weighted in Washington's favor. It worked, to some degree, with Japan and the European Union. But in targeting BRICS nations like India and Brazil with blanket tariffs, Trump risks pushing them toward each other and toward other powers like China and Russia in ways that could dilute US influence in emerging markets. The BRICS started as an economic concept in 2001, coined by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill to describe Brazil, Russia, India, and China as rising economies that could challenge the G7. The first BRICS summit took place in 2009, with South Africa joining 2 years later to form BRICS. Today, the group has expanded to 11 members, including Indonesia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, along with 9 partner countries such as Malaysia, Nigeria, and Thailand. Yet for much of its history, BRICS has been criticized as more of a political slogan than a functional economic alliance. The diversity in governance systems, economic models, and strategic priorities has made it difficult to coordinate on major policy shifts. That's why the current US tariffs are being watched closely. They may provide the rare external pressure needed to forge deeper cooperation. If BRICS leaders decide to coordinate trade policy, investment flows, or even currency usage to bypass US influence, the ripple effects could reshape parts of the global economy. How far can unity go? Still, the road to a united BRICS response won't be smooth. India, for instance, has historically resisted aligning too closely with China, wary of its growing influence and strategic ambitions. Russia's pariah status in the West also complicates matters, making it difficult for some BRICS members to deepen formal alliances without risking secondary sanctions. Even within the economic sphere, divergent interests could emerge. Brazil, as a major agricultural exporter, might prioritize securing new markets for soybeans and beef, while India's focus could be on protecting its tech and pharmaceutical sectors. The risk for Washington. From Washington's perspective, Trump's strategy might seem like a show of strength, a way to punish countries for policies seen as anti-American and to force better trade terms. But history shows that when multiple nations face the same economic pressure from a single source, they often look for ways to work together.
A importância da mulher.
For the 4th time, Brazil is hosting a BRICS summit. Of all of them, this one is taking place amid the most adverse scenario. The United Nations recently marked its 80th anniversary on June 26th of this year, and we are witnessing an unprecedented collapse of multilateralism.
If India, Brazil, and other BRICS members strengthen their internal trade, build alternative payment systems, or coordinate investment strategies, the long-term effect could be a weakening of US leverage in global markets. Moreover, the tariffs could encourage countries to move away from using the US dollar in trade, especially in energy transactions. This is already a topic of interest within BRICS, with discussions about expanding local currency settlements and reducing dependence on Western-dominated payment systems. While a full de-dollarization is unlikely in the near term, even partial shifts could alter global capital flows. As we look ahead, a single phone call between two leaders might not seem like the start of something big, but in the current global climate, where tariffs can shift billions of dollars in trade overnight, such moments can mark the opening moves of a much larger game. India and Brazil may not be ready to form an unbreakable alliance, but their shared experience under Trump's tariff blitz is forcing them to think beyond old divisions and toward new strategies. What happens next could reshape not just their bilateral trade, but the future of BRICS and possibly the balance of economic power in the 21st century. So, what do you think? Could Trump's aggressive tariffs end up creating the very alliances he's trying to prevent? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.